All right, and you, like I said, you can use your own home login. If you have your After Effects at home, you can use that as your login. That way, if you downloaded a font from Adobe, that font will still be available. Otherwise, you can just use your enterprise one and log in through that. And while we're opening After Effects and we're kind of getting things settled, just so you're aware too, if you're in video, what software are you typically using to edit your videos? Premiere, yeah, Avid. There's a couple other tools as well, Final Cut. After Effects can do video editing, and there are some people who will edit videos in After Effects. But if you bring a video in, you drop it into Premiere, and you hit play, what happens?
It slows down?
No, it plays.
Oh, it's fine.
Right, it plays in real time, right? In After Effects, it won't do that, okay? In After Effects, if we drop a video in here and we hit play, it has to go through and it has to save the entire thing that you're playing to the memory, and then it'll play back in real time, okay? So there will be this kind of like slower area in After Effects, which is why video editing isn't great in After Effects, because you hit play, it caches, then it'll play back in real time. The easier your stuff is, the faster it'll play. So right now, we will play back pretty much at real time. The second we hit the play button, it'll play back in real time. When we get into later projects, we'll hit play, we'll walk away, we'll go to the bathroom, we'll get a cup of coffee, we'll drink it, we'll go home and talk to our pets, we'll come back, and then it'll be ready to go, okay? It's an exaggeration, but not much of.
Yeah.
What component of the computer will give you most bang for the buck upgrade-wise? So would it be
In all the stuff that we're doing, there's three things, right?
so there's going to be graphics card, RAM, and
Processor.
processor?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Processor's the rough one to update, obviously.
Right, processor's the hardest one, but it really does depend on your computer too, right? So in any of these things, the more RAM you have, you can load more of that video into and play it back in real time. You could have an awesome processor, but it still can't load enough into the memory, right? A lot of the plugins too that we'll see are using the video card's memory too to process what's happening and save stuff. Yeah. Yep. It can do either, right? So I think on these computers might have it set up or not. But in the preferences, you can tell it use the graphics card if it's available or don't use the graphics card. I know on these ones we had an issue at one point where we would boot up After Effects and it would just crash within a minute because of something in the preferences that wasn't set right. They had to fix it. Part of the technology. The biggest thing is, like, I think if you have enough RAM, typically you're going to be better than upgrading a processor.
Yeah, no,
Right.
the processor is motherboard,
Right.
stuff.
And the P drive isn't protected, so if you don't save your stuff to your drive, someone can just come in next class and just wipe it out. It has happened before. We don't want it to happen, but it does happen. Okay?
That's why I have 2 additional things to save it on.
Good. Yeah, I had someone last semester who they lost their drive in the first month of class and never was able to get a new one and never backed up their stuff and constantly missing things. So just a quick view of the interface. I have a video that goes over more of an in-depth area. This is where we bring stuff in. This is where all of our content that we bring into After Effects will be located. This big window right here is where we'll see what the actual document is doing. And then down here is going to be our timeline. Most people have trouble working with keyframes because, again, you just don't understand the connection between how keyframes affect animation. Similar enough to Premiere that you can catch on, but different enough that it'll upset you. Okay. So what we're going to do is we need a document that we can then start working on. Okay. So we would not go to new here because new is just going to reset the entire project. Okay. The documents inside of After Effects are called compositions. If you're in Premiere or you're in Avid, they would be called sequences, I believe, right? So we're going to go to composition and go to new composition. So these are our settings. This class, we're going to use very specific settings to this class. When you get out into the world and you're doing this kind of stuff, typically they'll give you what the resolutions should be. The popular ones are things like 720p, 1080p, 4K. Those are the typical ones you'd work with. The bigger your document is, the slower it's going to go, right? So if you have a really slow computer and you're screwing around, you may want to go to even like smaller than 1280 by 720. It'll make things go a lot quicker. The worst thing about animating anything is when you don't get feedback quick enough, right? So if I'm animating a character and I move the arm and it takes 30 seconds for that to calculate, and then I hit play and I have to watch the body move very slowly, I don't get real-time feedback. I want to hit play and see it pretty much in real time. So we're going to use 1280 pixels by 720 pixels. And we're going to go at a frame rate of 24 frames per second. Okay, so 1280 pixels, 720 pixels. So is this going to be wider or taller?
Wider.
Wider, right? Just like your TV, right? And then we're going to do 24 frames per second. That will allow us to do, less frames per second, which means that it'll take up less memory when we're kind of previewing this. But this is typically a standard resolution you would see in the world anyway. Okay, 1280 pixels, 720 pixels, 24 frames per second, and then the final thing we're going to change is the duration. The duration is set up as, let me just copy it so we can see it, this. Okay. What do you think the first number on the right means?
Second.
Frames. Yep. And then the next one,
Second.
and then,
Minute.
and then,
Hour.
right. Okay. So as long as we understand that, we're good. Now this can also be written as that. Okay. If I were to erase that whole line, type in 820, After Effects is smart enough to recognize 8 seconds, 20 frames. Okay. So we don't have to worry about, and you guys are great for trying to be like specific. Sometimes you'll go in there and try to like type in the stuff here and then put that. Just wipe it out and you're able to type in whatever it is. Okay. So our animation is going to be 5 seconds long. So what number are we going to type in there? 500. Okay. So 5 seconds, 0 frames. We have to put the 2 zeros so it knows we're doing 5 seconds and 0 frames. Okay. We also have a background color. The background color is nothing to us. When it renders out, it's going to give us a flattened out movie. That's what the background color will mean. But we could always drop something in there. We can always come back and change the background color. Even the duration, we can change the size of that duration if we need to. On some projects, we might start off with 5 seconds and then move it up to 8 seconds and then move it up to 20 seconds, whatever we need. Typically, it's best to work at a smaller size and build up than to start with this like 5 hours and only work in this 5 seconds, okay? So if you wanted to, and I would recommend, write these numbers down because this is going to be something we're going to use across the board. 1280, 720, 24 frames a second, and 5 second duration. Now on our computers here, I don't know if these settings would go with us. I doubt they would because they're just preferences. But it's possible, I guess. This is a new kind of setup. We haven't done this before. So we'll have to see how preferences follow us around from day to day. Next time you come in, that should automatically be set if your preferences took. Okay, if you close the computer down, you reboot it, you re-log in, and that's your default, then you're good. Your preferences are kind of going with you. Sometimes they don't. Typically they don't in a lab environment. Other stuff we'll get into. So there's an advanced tab, there's a 3D renderer tab, and this is where too the video card and the memory come in because of how it's calculating that and what capabilities you have. We also have some stuff like square pixels. You might ask, why would you not want to have square pixels? Some films, if you remember back in the day when we had widescreen films, when they were just kind of new, they had actual like film. Like if you went to a movie theater, they would have film. the film that they would have had to be the same size as the regular film that they would have. And so what they would do is they would squish the pixels, and then when it projected, it would unsquish the pixels. It would stretch them back out. There's other reasons too, but that's the easiest way to explain it. Resolution being full, just another way for us to control how fast we're able to move on our stuff. Think of like InDesign. You guys have had InDesign before, right? You have 1,000 pictures in there. Sometimes it can go really slow. You grab all the pictures, you say low quality, and now it's moving a bit quicker. You want to see what they look like in full quality, you can grab all the pictures, say full quality, and you see the clearest image. Same thing here. We can lower our resolution to work quicker and then up it when we're ready to go. We also have start time code. This is something that for this class, most of the time we're going to be at 0, okay? The reason we would not have it at 0, let's say we're editing something in Premiere. We've shot this film, we're driving a car down the street, there's a billboard that we want to change. So in Premiere, we'll take that section of video out of Premiere and then bring it into After Effects. That time code from Premiere will come into After Effects, and it might be at like 3 minutes and 12 seconds or something. Now we know this is where that's going to go when we drop it back into Premiere so that it's linked up, okay? The Adobe products are good because they actually do link between them. There's something called the Adobe Dynamic Link. One of the reasons that I love using Premiere, one of the only reasons I love using Premiere, is that I can do that because I can say edit this in After Effects, it brings in After Effects. In After Effects, I can grab something and say edit in Photoshop, it'll go into Photoshop. And so I have this link between all of these different softwares. Other programs don't have that. Cool. And you'll notice that I am using my OneNote. I took a screenshot of that. I've saved that into my OneNote, so if I ever need to get it back again, there it is. Okay. Also, let's give this a name. We'll just call this playing 001. You can call it whatever you want. I know what mine's called. You make sure you know what yours is called. You need to develop a system. Final 1, Final 001, Final 002, Final doesn't work, okay? Make sure you're labeling these things with something that has some relevance, something that has a number attached to it. Even when we save our After Effects files, we want to organize our stuff and make sure we're saving in some way that we could recognize where we're saving it to. Okay, so now the only thing that's changed here is that we have a blank screen at the top, and then we also have a yep, the green line, and then we have this composition here. All right, so we have a composition. We have something we actually start building on top of now, okay? So think of it like Photoshop. Initially, we opened it up. There's nothing that we can do. Now we have a blank document we can start putting stuff into. So what I first want to do is just start making some basic shapes so that we can get used to making shapes and moving things around. There's two different kinds of shapes that we can do. One of them is called a shape, okay? It's an actual like shape. The other one is called a solid, okay? So we're gonna make a solid first. We'll see the limitations of the solid, and then we'll move on to shapes and see why we would choose one versus the other, okay? So hotkeys, so we can write this down, Control-Y. That's create a new solid. So you can think of a solid just like a blank layer in Photoshop or a blank layer in Illustrator. The only difference is that it's filled with something. It's filled with a color, and it has a size to it, okay? So it's only going to be a rectangle. That's our default shape for a solid. Is it's always going to be just this rectangle shape or square shape, depending on our proportions. Very similar settings that we saw on the composition. It wants to know the name, it wants to know the size, and it wants to know a background color. Those are typically the three things that we would deal with. So for now, go ahead, Control-Y. Sorry, click on, this is another thing that we have to look at. Click down here, and then hit Control-Y.
Yeah,
right?
It took me a while.
Yeah, the hotkeys are specific to where we're at, okay? Now the other spot is under Layer, New Solid, but that's 1, 2, 3 clicks. Control-Y, I do it with my left hand. I don't have to move my hand off the mouse. So we don't need to give this a name right now. We can leave it as whatever it's defaulting to. The size should be 1280 by 720. Just for fun, click and drag on the blue number. Don't click and then click and drag. Just click and drag in one swipe to anything. I don't care what it is. Okay, so click and drag on those blue numbers just to move them around so they're not at 1280 by 720. Okay, this is one of the awesome things about After Effects is they have virtual sliders. Everything you see that's a blue number, you can click and drag. Okay, I don't know why Photoshop does have this. InDesign doesn't, and I don't think Illustrator does to the same extent. It should be across the board, but whatever. All right, so this is not the same size as our composition. Notice the big button at the bottom that says Make Comp Size. Click that button. And we should see it go to that comp size again, okay? Yep, so typically when we create stuff, we are gonna have it at 1280 by 720. That should be the size that we would create for our stuff. Sometimes we'll create something that's perfectly square. Sometimes we'll make something that's super tiny. But for most of the stuff right now, we're just gonna leave it at the default size. Think of this also like Photoshop. If we were to make something very tiny and we scale it up, what's gonna happen to it? It's going to get pixelated or frizzy. So if we scaled something big and then made it smaller, we don't get that, right? So it's always better to make it bigger than smaller. But if we know right away that we're going to keep it small the entire time, we're good. We can keep it small the entire time. And again, this goes into memory. More of these bigger ones that we have, the bigger they are, or the more memory it's going to use. So 1280, 720. Let's pick a color. So pick something just disgusting. Just so we can see it. And then just hit OK. You'll see the color slider works very similar to all the other ones that we've used before. Right, Photoshop, Illustrator. We should see inside here on our document, we'll see little squares in the corners. Just based off of other Adobe software, what do we think those are going to do? Change the size, right? We can scale it in and out, whatever. If we grab a corner one, we can modify the width and height. If we grab the sides or the top, we can just do one at a time. If we want to change a color, so what was our hotkey to get to the solid? Okay, so we're going to do Control-Shift-Y, and that'll do it. Now, before we go to changing the color, hit cancel on yours real quick. I want you to double-click the solid. Do you see how those boxes in the corners are now gone? Okay, do you see the red bar that goes across? Okay, when we double click a solid, a layer, it brings us into that layer to edit it directly, okay? This means that we're not seeing the entire composition, we're only seeing that one layer. So if you look at the top, you'll see these tabs up here, and I'm just gonna close that tab, so I'm now back at my composition. The little X right there at the top. Yep. Okay. So you will do that all the time. I do that all the time. Just be aware when you're like, why isn't this updating or why aren't I seeing changes? That's why. So now you could hit Control-Shift-Y if you wanted to, and then you could change the color of that solid. Oh my God. Okay, look at that. I'll stick with the pink.
That was a bright green.
It was a bright green, right? I saw 2 green cars on the way here. It was weird. I've never seen very many 1 green car zone too, yes, sir.
Is the shape, is that a vector or a raster?
Yes. So inside of After Effects, it treats it as pixels. Everything we see is pixels. It's only when we're bringing something from, let's say, Illustrator into After Effects that we can tell it to treat it as a vector image, okay? And I'll show you that. Let me just make another solid. And I'll make this darker green. I'll make it very tiny. Okay? So if I take this and I make it really big and I scoot this over, you can see how that edge is nice and soft, or not nice and soft, it's soft, right? But I can go back into that setting, I can change that to 1280 by 720, and then it'll fix the resolution, okay? We typically don't want to do that if we can avoid it, just because it causes some other issues. If we were to do some stuff to the solid, then we resized it, it could make us redo a lot of our work. Sometimes just inevitable. All right, this is our magenta red solid. Your screen looks just like mine, yes? No, I have one more thing than you do, right? Down here at the bottom, you have different things that you could have showing. This is what yours is currently looking like from up here. These are different settings. We will get into what those settings mean. Don't be freaked out if yours ever looks different than mine. These buttons on the bottom here on the far left, right there, those change what appears here, okay? So if I just toggled these on, I would get more stuff. And if I turn these off, then I would get less stuff. Maybe. I don't use F9 because that's my recording software. I also right click and then you can go and add individual things here if you just like want one or the other. As you get more comfortable with After Effects, you need to do this kind of stuff. You need to figure out how you work fastest and get those things going, okay? Sometimes it's not going to be, you're not going to know. That's what this stage is. When you get into industry, you should be a rock star at this stuff. You should be like, yes, I know what tools I need and what things and blah, 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 and then you can start animating as quickly as possible. Even if you don't know what you're doing, it makes them think you know what you're doing, right? All right, so we want to move this around. So moving it is very simple. We can click on it, and then we can just simply move this shape around. Okay, so just click and move so you can see we can move that shape around. And if you grab the corners, you can also see that you can scale the item and then still move it around. Okay. It's glorious. All of these things can be animated. Every single thing that we manipulate inside of After Effects, we can animate. So a box moving from one side of the screen to the other, we can animate. Scaling, we can animate. Rotation, we can animate. There's tools at the top here. You'll see this is the regular selection tool, allowing us to move and scale. I'm going to tell you, never do this, okay? Never scale it using these corners here because I'm going to do something just so you can see it. If I click on this and I were to go and generate a checkbox, checkerboard, you can see how these are not checkerboards, they're like stretched out, right? Because I squished it like that, it does that. However, if I were to have kept it proportionate, and then did it, I would have perfect checkers. Yep. So we want to be aware of that kind of thing, that as we scale this thing, that definitely it could screw things up. Right. Now, in After Effects, we have to do it different, because if I hold Shift and I start dragging this, it deselects. So we have to click and drag first, and then as we're dragging, we would then hold Shift, and then we can do it. Okay. Now, this is typically the way I'll adjust all my stuff. I very rarely will use those corners to scale stuff in and out. I'll definitely use it to move stuff up and down, left and right, whatever. But I want to use other tools. This layer is not just a regular layer. In Photoshop, you would see just the layer there. We have a bunch of options inside this that we can tweak. On the far left side, there's an arrow right here. Don't even look at the arrow. Just ignore it for now. We want to bring those things out by using hotkeys, okay? So if I wanted to see the position, I would hit P, okay? So make sure your layer is clicked and hit the P key, and then we should see the positions for those things. We see position. How many numbers are there? 2, right? And what do those mean? Yep, X and Y coordinates. So left and right, up and down. And what color are they? Blue. So what does that mean we can do to them? Yep, sliders. We can just click and drag right on that. So if we're trying to maintain a nice smooth transition of our piece of text sliding in from one side, we want to use this. If I'm out here and I'm doing this, and even if I hold Shift, I may let go of Shift and accidentally knock it down a pixel. And now that just screws things up. So most of the time you want to click and drag to do that. Another reason why I like my trackball, because I don't have to go like this to get things to go off the screen. I can just click and drag, and I could literally drag forever with my mouse going to the right, and it'll keep keep going. Same thing the other way, up and down, okay? Now, position was P, okay? Let's say we wanted to rotate it. What do you think that is? R. Okay. How many numbers are here? What do you think they mean? One of them is degrees, right? The right one is degrees. Yep. And the other one is how many times, right? So think of a propeller on a helicopter. I wouldn't want to type in 7 trillion revolutions on this thing, right? I want 7 trillion degrees. I may want to type in 50 times I want it to spin around though, okay? So this left number is how many times it will spin all the way around. The right number is how many degrees, okay? And just to test our math, how many degrees are in a circle? 360, excellent. Okay, so if I were to click and drag on the right number, I would definitely see this thing moving around. Okay, and it could obviously go negative also.
Which means you're going the opposite way.
Yep.
Going, I guess, counterclockwise as opposed to the actual clockwise.
Yep. And then notice too that it doesn't say like 4,000 here or anything. It'll say you've gone one time around and negative whatever, okay? So it automatically will tell you you've gone this far, this many revolutions, and so on. All right, next one is scale. What do you think scale's hotkey is? S. And we have how many numbers? 2 numbers, X and Y, right? And then what's on the left side of those 2 numbers? The other left. The chain link, right? So it links those 2 numbers together. So if we click and drag on one, it's going to drag both of those numbers together. This is why it's more beneficial to scale stuff here. Because all I have to do is click and drag, and it'll shrink the entire thing down very quickly. Okay? So position, rotate, scale, opacity. What's the hotkey for that? T. You guys got it. We would think it's O. That's something else. So T is the hotkey for opacity. And then the same thing, we click and drag. Now something to take note of is that some of these are in pixels, right? Position is in pixels. How many pixels are we moving left and right, up and down? Rotation is in degrees. Opacity is in a percentage. Scale is also in a percentage, okay? These will come into play later, but just be aware that we are changing different things in a different way. Percentages, pixels, or degrees. All right, cool. So let's animate this thing sliding into our screen, okay? So I want you to take your note paper and I want you to draw a line across your note paper like so. It's like a football field type thing. Okay, and then we're going to plan out what we're going to do. And actually, I think I'll open up my OneNote. I'm going to have this right here. So draw this. Actually working. It is weird. Oh, there it goes. All right. I clicked the wrong thing, apparently. All right. So click that. Click this. Click that.
Are we doing it with our actual notebook?
No, with your actual notebook. I'm doing it here, so it's in the video. Okay. So this is our timeline. So we have to tell, we're going to tell After Effects what we want to do. This is an easy way for us to kind of plan it out ahead of time so that we can kind of conceptualize how this animation is going to happen. Okay. So at the start of this, we want it off screen, and then we want it to come on screen. We want it to hang out for a minute and then go away, okay? So the start frame is going to be about here, okay? So I'm going to grab my green. So put a little marker somewhere on the left side to say this is where it's going to start. And I'll just put ST for starting here. Okay, so it starts at 0. Then we want it to slide onto the screen. This is not seconds or minutes or frames. This is just animation layout. Okay, we don't know how fast, we don't know timing. All we want to do is see where we're going to be putting keyframes. Okay, so we're going to come down our timeline, and at some point we want this to get onto the screen. So about here, let's say, this will be on screen. So I'll just put like OS or whatever, some indicator so I know this is where that's going to be. Okay, so it's off screen, it slides onto screen. And then I want it to stay there a little bit. Okay, so if I have a certain amount of time that's staying there, I have to have an area where it's doing nothing. So this keyframe here, where it's on screen, is going to stay on screen until it starts moving again. So here, it'll also be on screen. And then what is the one at the very end going to be?
Or the end.
Yeah, off screen. So I'll just put end, I guess. Not okay. Now, the reason that we're kind of doing this on here first is so that we can see how many keyframes and where the keyframes are going to be. Usually people get tricked up because they say, I want it to do this, and do this. So they consider it as 3 different things. Where we can see there's actually 2. This movement here, start off screen to on screen. Then we have this nothing area, and then this is the animation here. So we have 2 actual pieces of animation that are happening on the screen. If we didn't have this keyframe here, what would happen to the sliding card? Right, it would keep going. It would go on the screen and go right back off. There would be no stopping point, okay? So we need to have those things. Now, what would happen if I took these first 2 keyframes and I squished them together? Appear quickly, right? Yep. So the closer keyframes are, the faster that action is going to happen. So if I stretch it out, the opposite, right? The slower it's going to go. Okay? So we have those things. Now we can go and set some keyframes. So back in After Effects, this is position. So I hit P because I'm going to be setting some position keyframes. And I'm going to start this off the screen. So I'm going to grab which one of these numbers here to drag it off the screen. The left one. Okay? Now, how far off the screen it goes, it matters, but not really. Okay? It's still going to go off the screen, but we can always adjust it afterwards. Now, if you need to zoom in and out, you can use your scroll wheel. I typically don't like to be like right on top of it because I can't see the edges. So I'll zoom out just so I can see that blank gray area on the side. All right. So we need to set a keyframe here. This stopwatch is an auto keyer. Okay? So that tells After Effects that on this property I want to start setting keyframes. So I'm going to click the stopwatch. And then that says I want to animate this property. We never have to touch that stopwatch again. Okay? Notice when we clicked it, this turned blue.
And there's a blue line.
Yep, and there's a blue line here and the diamond. Okay? That diamond is our keyframe. So anytime we see those diamonds, we'll have keyframes there. Now we have 5 seconds here. So we can definitely use up the whole 5 seconds, but this will be an incredibly boring animation of this thing sliding in and then sticking around and then sliding off. So let's just use 1 second, okay? So our little line here, the start is going to be at 0, the end is going to be at 1, so somewhere in the middle we're going to have these other 2 keyframes. So we click and drag our little ticker up somewhere between this and 1. You can see where 1 is because it says 1 right there, right? 1 frame or 1 second, 0 frames. All right, now what do we do to get it back on the screen? Drag it, right? You could type it in too, right? Now, how big was our composition width-wise? 1280, right? So 720 was the height. So what's half of 1280? 640, right? So my center point, if you look at it, 640. And it might seem silly, like what does it matter if it's 640, 641, 639? It will matter because what will happen is you'll notice it at some point that there's this hair line that you missed. And now you have to go back and reset a bunch of keyframes, okay? So make sure that your X position here is at 640. Okay, so we've animated it coming on. If we want to preview that, all we have to do is grab that blue tick thing at the top and drag it left and right. And so now we can see we've animated this going from off screen to on screen. Sure. Yeah, it is, yep. So it's just playing one frame after the next. Okay? So now we need to add this other keyframe here.
I'm guessing you hold shift, run a diamond, and then...
Nope.
Oh.
Nope, we're just going to go up ahead. Okay? Remember, we're staying between 0 and 1 second, so we don't want to go past that 1 second mark. And what we need to do is get this exact keyframe right here. So you can copy and paste it, but we're not going to do that. On the far left, there's a diamond that's hollow. Click that diamond. And what that does is it puts a, wherever you're at, it says put a keyframe here. Okay? Now if we wanted to get rid of the keyframe there, we could grab the keyframe and delete it, or we can click that diamond off and it'll just go away too. All right? Yes, sir?
So what if you did several diamonds and you click the diamond off? Will you get rid of all of them or the one?
Just the one we're on. Okay? Now it's a good thing to look at when you're setting keyframes. When you're working at a 5-minute animation and you're moving that ticker and you're trying to adjust a keyframe, if this thing isn't lit up, you're probably not on that keyframe if you're trying to manipulate it, right? So if we're really zoomed out, there's might be 20 keyframes in this cluster, but we're not on a keyframe. So we may want to go there and adjust it. When you do character animation, it's very likely you would have hundreds of keyframes just all over the place of every little thing that you're animating. All right, so we've set the first 3 keyframes, the start, it's on screen, it stays on screen, and now we have to go to the end. So now we'll go to 1 second, and then we will slide it off the screen. Sir?
Is the distance away from the screen important? Because, like, I think if you put it way further away, it would be faster.
Correct, right? So it's all a matter of distance. It's taking the distance and dividing it by how many frames it has, right? So if we were to have taken this, even though mine's like a hair off the screen, if I had have shot it like a mile down the road, it would still take that many frames to get there, meaning that it wouldn't be on the screen as long, right? So we always want to have as much control as we can, so we keep it right there. Good question. All right, so now we want to preview this. How fast are we clicking and dragging this? Are we clicking and dragging it at real time? Probably not, right? If I click this blue ticker and I just do this really slow, that could happen at any speed. Or if I go like this, it's happening super quick. So I want to see in real time what it's going to look like. So in every other software, pretty much, what's the play button? Space. So hit the space bar. So now what we're seeing is, what we should be seeing is it's off screen, it slides on screen, it hangs out, and then it slides back off the screen. Yeah, right? So we play this animation, that's 1 second, then we have to wait 4 seconds for it to get to the end and then come back around. So we have what's called a work area. If we're working on this 5-minute animation, but we really want to focus on these 3 seconds, we can say start of the work area, end of the work area, okay? So one of our bars right here, this blue ticker right there is the start of the work area. This blue thing right there is the end of the work area. Again, we don't want to actually slide these things manually because we're not cavemen. We want to move our ticker to where the end of our work area is going to be, so shortly past our animation. And we want to hit the hotkey for it, which is N.
And for the end.
N for the end. Yep. And now when we hit play, it should loop right there. It should just constantly play this animation over and over again.
Whoa.
Sir?
So if you did that, will it flow faster?
It will, yes. Because if we had a whole bunch of stuff happening here, it would still calculate it even though we only care about this. When we do that work area, it only cares about that. Okay? Now, something to pay attention to also, this green line. So when we talk about After Effects and it using resources, when we hit play, it's saving every single one of these frames into our memory, okay? And then when it runs out of memory, it saves it to the hard drive. And sometimes it'll actually do both, where it's saving it to the hard drive and using the memory. Just so you're aware of it for your own personal use. But just so you can see it, it does have a folder where it saves all this stuff. If I go, I'm going to hit stop again. If I go to Edit Purge and I say All Memory and Disk Cache, it'll actually take all that memory, disk cache, things that it's saved, and it'll get rid of it, okay? Sometimes you're working on a big project, or you just haven't done this in a while, that disk cache can fill up. You could have 60 gigabytes of data just sitting on your hard drive doing nothing. So I'm going to go there. Yeah, I only have 28 megabytes so far because this is a new install. And I'm going to say Purge. It's not going to kill anything on your computer. Everything will still work. It just has, if you look, my disk cache is now empty. My RAM is empty. It has to reload that stuff. And again, because this project is pretty simple, we don't have a huge effect on that. Okay? Cool. All right. So that's a solid. That's how we're able to get this thing on and off the screen. Okay? Let's hide this for a second. So we're going to click the eyeball on the far left to hide our solid. There's our solid, the eyeball right there. Not that I know of. Yeah, just turn the eyeball off so we don't see that layer. It's still there, it's still doing stuff, but we just don't have it on the screen at the moment. Okay? So a solid is basically position, rotate, scale, opacity. There's also skew, which I don't think I've ever used for many projects, if anything. Typically those four you'll use all the time. You have a solid color. Usually I'll use that for putting stuff on top of it. So if I did a mask, I would use a solid. If I'm doing an effect, I would do a solid. Okay? And that's basically where you're going to be dropping all your kind of effects on top. If I wanted a lens flare, I have a solid, I drop a lens flare on that solid, and now I have that, okay? The next one is a shape. And shapes are very similar to Illustrator or Photoshop, where we can draw stuff out, okay? Or we can use default shapes, okay? So the first thing we want to do is make sure we're not selected on this. So deselect just by clicking off underneath it, clicking off in our comp somewhere, just so we're not selected on it. The reason we don't want to be selected is because when we create a shape and we have a solid selected, it'll actually create a mask on that solid. It'll actually cut a hole in it. We don't want that. We want a separate shape layer. Okay? So up here is the rectangle tool. If you click and hold on it, you'll see all the different shapes that are available. Okay? So let's go to, let's say, the star tool or the ellipse tool, something besides the regular rectangle tool. And then you just click and drag. Okay, so now what we have is we have a solid, shape layer. Okay, you'll see the new layer that just got created is called a shape layer. This one still has position, rotate, scale. So if this is where we have a bit of a difference too, right? So we have other stuff, but we also have this ability to change the color right here. So we can click right on the fill and give it a different color there. We can give it a different stroke color as well. And we can also change the size of the stroke. Okay, just like you would inside of Illustrator, you can modify those settings. Yes, sir? You can. Yep. So notice how the word fill is in blue and the word stroke is in blue. if you click on those, it gives you more options. Okay? So this is where we can take the stroke off. We can change it to a solid color. We can change it to a linear gradient, or we can change it to a radial gradient. Okay? So if I change this to, let's say, a linear gradient, and then I hit OK, then I can click on the swatch for the color, and now I get a gradient up here. And then you can obviously modify what those colors are. Mm-hmm.
Can you add a bevel to a shape?
Yes. So we do have also all the same effects that we would have from Photoshop, all those layer styles. We have those here too. So you can do like bevel emboss, drop shadow, and all of that. Okay. So I'm going to make this a lot so like weird looking. Get rid of that. Let's go to solid. Yes. Okay, so we have the ability to change the fill, change the stroke, change the colors, change the styles. We just created a shape layer mat. Okay, so now what I want us to do is let's go look at the layer controls that we have for each of these. Okay, so on the magenta red solid, which is what mine's called, that was our solid. I want you to open up the arrow on the far left of it. Okay. If you have something already there, like it only shows one thing, collapse it and then reopen it again. You should have a list of things there, sir. You can just collapse that. Just bring that in. There you go. And then collapse that one and then open that up again. There it is. Okay, so we should see on this one anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Those same things that we were able to modify before. Anytime we open up these arrows, it'll show us all of these. Now typically we're not dealing with all of these, which is why we don't want to do that. We don't want to ever have like all of these showing, because in some compositions you'll have hundreds of layers. And if you have hundreds of layers and each one of those has the thing collapsed, you'll never be able to get to the thing you're trying to get to. All right, so on this solid, this is typically what we get. As we add stuff to it, if we were to add a mask, we would get a mask tab inside here. As we add effects, we would get an effects tab, okay? Now let's collapse our solid and open up the shape layer one. Now on the shape layer, you're going to see a lot more stuff. You'll actually see contents. If you click star, you'll see polystar. If you clicked rectangle or whatever, you'd see that name. And then you'll see path, stroke, fill, transform, and then you'll see another transform. Okay? So this layer itself has its own transform, or the shape itself has a transform, and then the layer has another transform. Okay? So there's lots of different ways that we can manipulate a shape versus manipulating a solid, okay? Now the benefits of the shape is that there's a lot more options. We can do a lot more things with them. We can customize this star a lot more than we could just the shape or just the solid. But do we need that all the time? That's something that we always kind of look at, right? For this assignment that we're doing now, our title card, most of our stuff can just be rectangles or basic shapes if we need them. We don't need all the bells and whistles. As we add stuff to our list of things we're using, we definitely will be using shapes, okay? All right, you don't do this part, I'm gonna do this part. I'm gonna make a new shape because I want you to see it, but we don't need to follow along because we'll actually do this later. So I'm changing the size of my shape layer here. And in this case, I have a, this is my ellipse, that's my circle. I'm changing the size directly of that shape, okay? I'm not changing the size of the layer. I'm not changing the dimensions of the entire shape content. It's just basically like the dimensions of that one item. It also has a position here. It has a position here. And if I open this up, there's another position there. So there's several different ways we can kind of manipulate the position of that shape. Now this is what I want to show. One of the reasons that we use shape layers is because of this thing here. These are all different shape layer only things that we can add directly to a shape layer. So things like twisting, wiggling, zigzagging, repeating, rounded corners, way up the top, more stuff, a bunch of stuff we can add to this. I'm going to do the trim path one, and I'm going to go and leave that. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the fill, so I don't want to fill on this. I'm going to make this bigger. I'm going to go to my size here and shrink this down to about there. Okay, that's close enough. 271 is what I want. Cool. All right. So like I said, you can see all the stuff that I'm getting here and how many, this one layer, look how much real estate is taking up on my screen with all of that stuff, right? The thing that I just added is trim path, which is right there. It has a start and an end. Notice all of these have stopwatches. And what do stopwatches mean? You can animate it. Yep. So we can animate any of these properties. Now, as you go along and you're using After Effects, you will have a bunch of little tools that just kind of get dropped into your brain. And as you're doing a project, you're like, I think this tool would work for this, and you try it out and you'll see. This is one of those tools that from the time you start After Effects to the time you get done with After Effects and you're 100 years old, you'll use this tool, okay? Because it's like an awesome one. It basically allows me to take that path and control where it's at, okay? So I can basically like write the path on. So if I go to the end of this, you can see it does that, right? So I'm going to take the end of this. I'm going to scooch you up a little bit. I'm going to go to the end. And you'll see, there's my animation. Now, I can change stuff about this, like the size of the stroke. So let's say I take the stroke down. Right? That's kind of cool how it's just writing. It's going super slow, so I'm going to speed it up by squishing those together. Right? Much better, much more dynamic. Yep, we'll get our boring one won't have that. Our fancy one will, right? Or can. Now, watch what happens when I add the start to this as well. So the end is controlling how it's writing this way. The start is going to control the other side of it. So I'm going to add actually extra keyframes for this other property here. I think I'm going to scooch that a little bit more. Right? So now we get this kind of like little blippy thing. Now watch what happens when I take this and duplicate it, and I scale it up a little bit, and then I give it a little rotation. Oops. And I'm going to offset it a couple frames. Right? So now I have two of these things. A very simple thing, a couple keyframes, and this is the kind of thing at the beginning of that Overwatch we saw the little wiping thing. That's what they did. And again, this is something that you will use all the time. Trim path is one of those things. I can't do this with a shape layer or with a solid. I can only do this with a shape layer with a path. Okay? So I'm going to delete that for now and get us back to where we were. Cool. All right, so hide your shape layer. So collapse all your bars there and then hide the shape layer. And then next to the shape layer, you'll see the pen tool. Okay? So we have nothing selected. We're going to go to the pen tool and just draw a path.
Wait, where's the pen?
Right next to the shape layer on the top. Up here, Matt. The shape tool, yep, right up here. Sorry, I keep saying shape layer.
I'm trying to find it.
Right here,
Oh,
way up there. Now, the hotkey for the pen tool is, was that? G, right? Because After Effects is, again, close enough to the other softwares that we enjoy it, but just off enough that it's going to upset us. I don't know. With Pia's position, it should just work, because I'm up there. All right, so the pen tool works in a very similar fashion. Again, you don't have to worry about the ins and outs of every single thing. I don't expect you to memorize all the hotkeys for every single thing. What I expect you to do is be able to navigate it, to be able to go up to the pen tool or hit G. By the end of the semester, you'll have these things ingrained, And then as you're going, you realize what the functionality should be, and you can tweak those. For instance, the handlebars here, do you think we can manipulate them like we can in other softwares? Yeah, right? So if I hold down Alt and I drag this, I can break the handlebar just like I could inside of Illustrator or Photoshop or InDesign. If I hold down Alt and I click and drag right on it, I could then unite those things again, okay? Now notice what, as we drew this, what did After Effects call what we started to draw? A shape, right? So this is a shape layer. This is exactly the same thing as the circle or the star or whatever. We can customize exactly what it looks like, okay? Now we can also bring in stuff that we drew in Illustrator. We can save it as an Illustrator file. We can bring that into After Effects. And then in After Effects, it will allow us to convert those to shape layers or to keep them as Illustrator layers, whatever we want to do with those, okay? Sir? It does too, with Photoshop as well, right? As long as you have, I haven't tried it with all of them, right? So I think, like if I'm using Krita, Krita can save a PSD, and then that PSD should be able to read into this. But I don't know about every other program. Like Procreate, I would assume would also. As long as you can save it as, let me see if there's, oops. Let me just disable my stuff here. Just put that back later. As long as you can save it as one of those file formats, yes. And I think PSD is one of the popular ones that typically a lot of those would. If you're paying, I think it's $30 for Procreate, right? Something like that. $10, even better. Yeah, so if you're paying money for it, I would assume it would save or export as a PSD. If anything, you could save your layers out as something else, bring that into Photoshop, and then pop it in there, okay? There's always a workaround. There's always a way to do that. You could also, I think it's, do I have that here? Import. I don't see it right away. But you can also link from 3D softwares, right? So inside of After Effects, you can link right to Cinema 4D. So if you use Cinema 4D and you have like an animation, you want to drop some 2D stuff with your animation, you can bring those two things together. Same thing with Maya. You can live link these things together too. Again, just finding that pipeline between the softwares. Okay, cool. So that's that. So let's delete all the stuff that we've created and let's actually make something with text and whatever else. So over here in our composition or our project area, just delete all the stuff that's there. Okay. Again, this is the boring one. Don't think it has to be exciting. This is just for us to get used to some of the basic tools. So what's the first thing we need to do when we start our new stuff?
Go to composition.
Yep, and make a new composition. You have your settings written down, right? Should be the same settings, and if you had them correctly the first time, when we went to new composition, they should automatically be there. We just now have to give it a name. So I'm just going to call this title card boring. Just a sidebar on naming. Anytime you name something, this is not a thesis paper. These are file names or composition names. Short, no spaces are typically good, okay? So anytime I name something, I typically will go with, let's say, title card. That's all one word with the T and the C capitalized, and then I do an underscore, and I do what kind it is, boring. If I do a fancy one, title card underscore fancy, okay? Yes, sir.
So wait, both title cards are the same first assignment?
Yes. Well, title card boring is the first assignment. Title card fancy we'll do afterwards, okay?
So I thought title card fancy would be number 2.
It is. Title card boring is going to be the first one, and then we're just going to build off that and go to title card fancy. But boring is, we're not making fancy yet. We're just doing boring.
Okay.
All right. So 1280, 720, 24 frames per second, 5-second duration. All right. So I have my sketches here of something that I want mine to look like. I'm going to build what I want this to do, okay? So I know that in mine, and you can watch mine, and then you'll have time to build yours too. So this isn't going to be a I click, you click. I'm going to build mine, you watch, take notes, and then afterwards you'll build yours, okay? Nothing that we've done so far in class, except for text, will be outside of what we already went over together. So I'm going to first make a background, okay? Even though my background is black, I'm making a new background. So again, layer new solid, but don't hit layer new solid, hit Control Y, okay? And then give it a background color. I mentioned before that we want to always think about things like color, design, shape, all of that stuff. Anything we do can be changed later. So initially I like to go with kind of like a boring color scheme and then go back afterwards and then actually give it the colors that I want. So I'm going to stick with mainly like grays and then adjust my colors afterwards. Okay, if I go with a little bit brighter here, there we go. All right, so this is my background. Originally our screen is going to be totally blank. The background will come into the screen, and then all of our text and stuff will come on the screen, and then everything will then go away, right? So I have that. I'm going to put in my text. So here's my text tool. You can look at it and see, I again never use the vertical type tool. I don't know why we need that necessarily. I'm just going to use horizontal, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to lay this out. So I'm going to do 0, 1. I'll switch to my arrow tool. And then over here in my character, same stuff you've used in Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, it's the same stuff, except we can click and drag right on that number and make it bigger. Again, I don't know why they don't have it in other softwares, but they don't. Now I'm going to go and grab another one, and I'm going to do the assignment. So this is going to be title card, and then I'll just put boring underneath it. Grab all my type, shrink it down. Now I'm purposely not going over every single step that I'm doing. A second ago, I hit Control A to grab all my type and I resized it. I'm hoping at this point you've gotten to class, you can kind of figure those things out, okay? Now, the next title card or the next thing that I do here, page transitions, hologram, whatever it is, that's going to go in this spot, okay? So I want to make sure that, let's say I did this that big, and then I were to change my name to page transition, you can see it goes off screen. Even if I went down to the next line and typed in transition, you can see it might be a little bit too close to the edge, okay? It also looks horribly compositioned. That looks better. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like that. I'm also going to make sure I pick some decent fonts. Helvetica is always a good one. Don't mix fonts on your stuff. You don't want to have 17 different fonts. For something like a title card, if you used a serif and a sans serif, that's sufficient. Or you used one font and you used bold and italic for that same one, or bold and thin or something like that, those are sufficient. We only have really 4 pieces of text that we're getting across. That's going to be good. Even this one, maybe I'll go to my Helvetica and change this to light. That looks kind of cool. I'm going to put a line here, so I'm going to go to my pen tool, click off, and I'm just going to go click, hold down shift, and click, and then go to my arrow tool. Now with this, I can't really see it, but it's green, so I'm going to go up here to the color and choose a better color. I'm also going to change the stroke size, and then I can start adjusting stuff. You can also use your arrow keys. All right, so that looks pretty good. And then I have my other stuff there and there. So now I'm going to drop in my name here. If you remember from our notes, we have the name, which is our name, the class, semester, something in those areas, assignment number, assignment name. All right, so Sean Sarcona. Whoops. You have to be careful that you don't accidentally move stuff around. Like this background, you can see I'm trying to grab my name and it's moving my background around. It is, yep. So I could go down here to the lock and click the lock. And I just duplicated my name. Control D is the duplicate, and I will go MACA 1900. Okay, I don't want to, I mentioned this last time, I don't want to type out MACA 1900 Introduction to Motion Graphics, Monday, Wednesday, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's way too much information. Nobody cares. This information will not change. This information will not change. Maybe it will, I guess, during the semester. It depends how it goes. But these two will always change. 02, 03, 04. Because this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to test it out. 0, 3. Watch what happened. It bumped over, right?
Yeah, because 3 has more width.
Right.
than 1.
So how can I fix that so that when I type it in, it doesn't do that? Change the alignment, right? So right now we're left alignment. It's left justified, so it's keeping that left side locked in. Realistically, I want the right side locked in, so the right doesn't move. So I'm going to go to my paragraph and go to right alignment, which then scoots it over, which then I can just scoot back here. And I can test it out. All right, it still did it, whatever. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on the font. Now, when I get to assignment 2, assignment 3, I have to be aware of that. It's going to scoot over. I'll have to adjust my animation, okay? So this is my boring title card. That's all that's there. I have a background. I have pieces of text. That's it, okay? Notice all the layers that I have down here. Everything is going to be animated the same exact way that we did our other animation. Text is going to be off screen. It's going to come on screen and hang out, and then it's going to go away. Okay? You're going to have to play with what timing looks good, what timing is going to work. What we don't want to do is everything is off screen and then everything pops onto screen at the same time. That looks horrible. Okay? This is boring. We don't want it to look horrible. We just want it boring. Okay? So I'm going to take these things and I'm going to animate them all at the same exact time, and then I'm going to offset each one of those. Okay? So I know that I have 5 seconds. Everything has to happen super quick, okay? Super quick. So within, like, let's say this is 12 frames right here. Within 12 frames, that's my transition to get something on screen and then to get something off screen, okay? So I'm going to go to the beginning of this. I'll do my background first. And if it helps you while you're doing your stuff, hide your other layers so you don't see them, okay? I'm going to hit P for position. I'm going to scooch this off screen. And then I have to decide how I want it to animate. Our other one, we went from the left side into the right side. How do we want these things to come in? We could have it drop in. We could have it pop in. I could have different things happening in different directions. It should make some kind of sense, okay? If everything comes up from the bottom, that's fine. If everything comes in from the left, that's fine. If some come in from above or the left or the right, that's fine too. Think of it like an artistic thing of what is going to look good. Okay? You, as new people to animation, have to think about what works and what doesn't work. Okay? So I'm going to take this in from the bottom. So I set my first keyframe here. I'm at 0. The end of this is going to be 12. Okay? That's when it's going to get back on the screen. So now I'm going to go up to 12. I'm going to slide it back up. And again, if I remember the halfway point, I can just type that in. Okay? I can test it out. Boom, there it is. Now, it has to stay on screen long enough to get everything on and off the screen. So I'm going to go to, let's say, 2 seconds. I'll hit my diamond. I'll go up to 212, and then I'll scooch it off the screen. Now, whichever way it started on the screen, typically that's the direction I'm going to keep going. I don't like to bring stuff in and then take it out the same way. It feels non-progressive. Okay? So there's the one. Waits, and it goes off screen. Okay, that's it. Now I'm going to turn off my background, and now I'm going to go to my next one. So I'll go to the 0, 1. I've hid the other layers. My ticker is back at the beginning. I go to position, and I'm going to set the position. Now notice from the last one, my first keyframe was in a brand new position that my background never was, right? I never moved my background way underneath. My second keyframe ended up where? Right on screen, right where it started. So I ended up moving it off screen just to then move it back onto screen, right? So you don't have to set keyframes in the same order, left to right. You can set keyframes in any direction. So if I were to go up to, let's say, 12, and I set my first position keyframe here, that locks in where it's going to end up. Then I can go back to 0 and then pull it off screen. Okay, so I'm just going backwards. You can do it either way. This way I find is easier. So now there it comes in. Then I'm going to go up to 2 seconds like I did the other one. Click the diamond, go up to 212, and then drag it off. Turn my position off. I can preview it, of course. I'm just going to go to the next one and do the same thing. Go to position, go to 12. And this one I'm going to have come in from the bottom. Set my keyframe. Now, it may take you 2, 3, 4 times to figure out your keyframe stuff. That's not a big deal. Everyone has this transition period where they're figuring out how keyframes work, how everything goes together. The idea is that you just keep at it. Eventually, you will understand how to set keyframes. Notice how some of these I'm going up with them, some of these I'm going down with them. Okay, but they're always going in the same direction. This one, that one. This one I'm going to come in from the left side. Actually, the right side I'll come in from. Go to 12, set my keyframe right here. Whoops. Go to 2 seconds. Click my diamond, go to 212, scooch it off screen. Go to 12. Go to 2, set my diamond, go to 212, and push it off screen. Okay, so now if I turn all my eyeballs on, I hit play, this is what we don't want to happen, that. Okay, it's just too much going on. No one can read that, there's no categories or anything. All right, so there we go, right, so that's everything. Now, I want to control when things are going to happen, okay? So the background layer is always going to be my background layer. It's always going to be at the bottom of this heap. The other layers, there's not really a stacking order, so I can really move those around to whatever I feel like it, okay? So if I typically like to organize things in a way that makes sense animation-wise, if the top thing gets animated first, then the second thing, then the third thing, then the fourth thing. So I can do this kind of like stair-stepping. So I think having 0, 1 title card boring is kind of like the main attraction, so I'm going to have that happen last, okay? So the first thing that's going to happen is my dark gray solid. Then I'm going to have my class name come in, so I'm just going to scoot that down. Then I'm going to have my name come in. Then I'll have 0, 1 come in. Then I'll have the line come in, and then I'll have title card boring come in, okay? So that's my order. Now that doesn't change my animation. My animation is still the same. That just changes the layer order itself. Now, as I take these, that bar, just like you would see in Premiere or Avid or any other editing tool, controls where the animation is. So I scoot that bar over, I scoot the whole animation over, okay? So I'm going to take MACA 1900, and I'm going to scoot it up to 12. There's 12. This one I'm going to scoot up to 1. This one I'm going to scoot up to 112. The line I'm going to scoot up kind of in the middle of this. And then that one I'm going to scoot up to probably that. I think I have to scoot these back maybe a little bit more because I didn't really allow enough time for those. All right, so I'm just kind of scooting these back arbitrarily. And then let's play it and see. Okay. Now there's a huge issue there, which is what? Yeah. Right. So I'm going to squish everything back even further. Right? And this is what's great about having all the animations set up from the very beginning, is we can just kind of move everything like this. Right? So everything's not coming at the same time. It's definitely not as, fancy as we would like it. Maybe I'll give these guys a little bit more time here. Let's see. There we go. So this is boring. It works. All right, I think that 01 title card can just scoot away a little bit more. Okay. Now I could also go in there and edit the keyframes and everything. We're not there yet. Don't worry about that. Okay. This is the boring one. This is for us just to get used to it. The basic thing of sliding it in screen, sliding it off screen, that's enough for the first part of this. Okay. So what I want you to do for the rest of the hour is to create your layout and then animate your stuff coming into the screen, hanging out, and then going off screen. And then doing a stair step of how you want these things to animate in there. And then, of course, we want to hit Control S to save it and actually put it somewhere where we have files so we don't lose all of our work. Questions yet? Sir?
Is a video for this going to be on YouTube?
It will be, yes.